In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in a small community called Breathenheath with about 400 residents, an 18-year-old girl named Linda Stoltzfus lived with her parents and 9 siblings. This community belonged to the Old Order Amish, known for their traditional way of life. The Amish are peaceful and kind people who lead a simple lifestyle. Women in their community are not allowed to cut their hair, while men, on the contrary, must grow beards. Their clothing is also plain, without buttons or zippers. This religious group rejects the use of modern technologies such as electricity, phones, and cars. From an early age, the Amish teach their children to work hard and they themselves put in a lot of effort. Typically, Amish communities are located in small provincial towns where they engage in agriculture and have large families. Linda's father worked as a carpenter, and her mother was a homemaker who took care of the house and children. Due to the prohibition on using modern technology, the children did not have mobile phones or social media profiles. That's why there were very few photos of Linda. On June 21, 2020, Father's Day, a tragic event occurred. Linda disappeared. It happened during the day when the girl was returning home from church. The service ended around noon, and Linda set off alone to go home, change clothes, and grab a pie before returning to the church for an important meeting. Her parents were waiting for her at the church, but she never showed up. Concerned, the parents decided to go home to find Linda, but she was not there, nor were the clothes she had been wearing. The pie she had intended to take with her remained on the table, indicating that she had not made it home. The family and other community members began searching for the girl, combing the area along the road she would have taken to get home, but to no avail. Eventually, they were forced to seek help from the police. The police immediately got to work and organized a massive search for the missing girl. In addition to volunteers, police officers, the FBI, dog handlers with service dogs, drones, mounted police, and ATV units were involved in the search. Despite the fact that a total of 338 people participated in the search efforts, no trace of Linda was found. To encourage people to provide information about the girl's whereabouts, a reward of $10,000 was announced. While the search operations were ongoing, investigators went to the church to question parishioners who had seen Linda on the day of her disappearance. Witnesses said that on that day, the girl was dressed in her usual church attire, a light brown dress, a white apron, and a dark headscarf. She was in good spirits, as always. Linda walked home barefoot, carrying her shoes in her hands. Her parents assumed that their daughter was walking home by her usual route, as there was only one main road leading to their house, which was the shortest path. They doubted that Linda would have taken any detours. Moreover, their county had always been considered a quiet and safe place with a very low crime rate. That's why the police initially considered the version that the girl might have run away from home as the main one. It was assumed that Linda, perhaps tired of the traditional Amish life with its strict limitations, had decided to flee in search of a freer life. However, when investigators questioned the missing girl's friends and acquaintances, they all unanimously stated that Linda was completely happy. She liked living according to the rules of their community, loved her family, was always in a good mood, and helped teach children at the local school. In addition, Linda had several trips planned that she was looking forward to. The girl was on excellent terms with everyone. Therefore, she had no compelling reasons to run away, so everyone was convinced that she would never have taken such a step. Dismissing the runaway theory, investigators focused on the likelihood of the girl being abducted. They began searching for potential witnesses and reviewing surveillance camera footage in the area to try to track her movements. 2 weeks later, on July 8, 2020, detectives managed to find a witness who lived near Linda's supposed route. The man said that on that day, around 12:30 p.m., while he was sitting on the porch of his house, a red sedan drove past him. This car caught his attention due to the driver's strange behavior. First, the car passed the witness's house, then turned around, stopped for a minute, and then drove past the witness again in the direction of the church. The man noticed that there were 2 people in the car, the driver with dark hair, and someone in the passenger seat whom the witness could not make out. It turned out that this was not a random car in those parts. The day before Linda's disappearance, a group of 20 Amish girls walking along the road had seen the same car drive past them 3 times at a very slow speed. The girls remembered the car, and described the driver as a dark-skinned man with curly dark hair. He acted as if he was looking for something, and looked at the girls with such a creepy gaze that it made them uncomfortable. Another woman was also found who had encountered the red car. According to her, the car passed her 4 times, and the driver carefully examined her. The frightened woman ran to local fishermen who were nearby, after which the suspicious driver immediately disappeared. Investigators speculated that the unknown man was looking for a convenient victim, but did not dare to attack a whole group of girls or a woman in the presence of witnesses. Police found several surveillance cameras in the area that could have captured Linda, and seized the recordings for detailed examination. After a long and painstaking work, they managed to find the necessary fragment. The video captured the same red car that the witness had mentioned. It was a vehicle similar to a Chevrolet model. The car had several distinctive features. There was a spoiler on the trunk, some damage or stickers were visible. Although it was not possible to clearly see who exactly was inside the cabin on the recording, a white spot was visible on the passenger seat, the nature of which the police could not understand. Thanks to the license plate number, detectives were able to identify the car's owner. It turned out to be a 35-year-old man named Justo Robert Smoker. Law enforcement officers carefully studied all available information about him. It was discovered that Justo was born in 1985 in Costa Rica into a very poor family. His biological parents could leave the children alone for weeks at a time. To feed himself, his brother, and sister, the boy was forced to steal. Later, the children were taken away from their negligent parents and placed in a shelter, where Justo suffered both physical and sexual. When the boy turned 7, he was adopted by another family along with his brother and sister. The adoptive parents treated the children with kindness, so it seemed that a better life awaited Justo. He did well in school, was fond of football and wrestling. However, in his teenage years, he began using banned substances and resorted to theft again. The boy was repeatedly arrested but released each time due to his minor age. The first serious punishment caught up with Justo in 2006 when he turned 21. He was sentenced to imprisonment for a term of 12.5 to 30 years for robbery. However, he served only half of the term behind bars. His brother was released in 2016, and Justo himself in 2019. Justo's early release from prison a year before Linda's disappearance had tragic consequences. At the time of the incident, the man was working at a factory located 15 kilometers from the Amish community in Berdenheath. The police went there to inspect his car, which was parked in the factory parking lot. Justo's vehicle completely matched the one that was captured on the surveillance cameras. In particular, it had the same spoiler, damage, and stickers. The detectives decided to follow the suspect. Waiting for the end of his work shift, the police discreetly followed Justo. The man arrived at his house, which was located 10 kilometers from the factory. Investigators visited him to talk about Linda's disappearance. Justo denied being acquainted with the girl or ever seeing her. He claimed that he was not in that area at all on that day. However, the detectives knew this was not true, as his car had been recorded by surveillance cameras. At that point, the police did not have enough evidence to charge Justo, but he was already considered the main suspect. Investigators tracked his phone calls and found out that on the day of Linda's disappearance, around noon, the man was in the area where she vanished. He was also seen there on June 20th when a group of Amish girls walked past him. It was him. Police investigated information about the suspect's banking transactions and discovered that on those days he was buying a lot of alcoholic beverages. It seemed that the man was drinking alcohol and driving around the county in search of a convenient victim. In addition, on the morning of June 21st, the day Linda disappeared, at 9:30 a.m., he purchased 2 pairs of latex gloves and 3 pairs of shoelaces at Walmart. Investigators suspected that Justo was a real predator who was hunting specifically for Amish girls, considering them easy prey. In that area, there were practically no surveillance cameras, the population was small, and the girls were defenseless and unable to fight back. Detectives continued to study recordings from other cameras, trying to track the route of the red Chevrolet. After long and painstaking searches, investigators finally came across a recording that captured the moment of the girl's abduction. The video showed a red car moving along the road behind a pedestrian, presumably Linda. Suddenly, the car pulled over to the side of the road, the driver got out of the cabin, crossed the road, and approached the girl. The man pulled something white over her head, resembling a bag, after which they both headed to the car. The time on the recording showed 12:41. While studying the surveillance camera recordings located near the school, police noticed the same red Chevrolet, which had two people inside. The car entered the school parking lot and disappeared from the camera's view. However, just 5 minutes later, the car drove back onto the road and headed away. Later, eyewitnesses were found who saw this car near the school around 1:30 p.m. that same day. They turned out to be an Amish couple. A woman named Sarah said that she noticed a girl from their community sitting in the passenger seat, dressed in a brown dress, a white apron, and a dark headscarf. However, Sarah could not make out the passenger's face. She also noted that there was no longer anything white on the girl's head. Sarah waved at her, but the girl did not react in any way, which seemed strange and rude to the woman, since the Amish usually travel in horse-drawn carriages, not in cars. Investigators speculated that Justo had specifically driven into the school parking lot to remove the white bag from the girl's head and calm her down a bit before continuing on his way. Later, other witnesses were found who had seen a red car that day with a girl from their community, dressed in traditional clothing, sitting in the passenger seat. They all paid attention to this, since Amish women are not supposed to ride in cars. In addition, while tracking the movements of Justo's phone, detectives noticed one suspicious place. After Linda's disappearance, the man visited a certain building located 5 kilometers from the Amish settlement 7 times. Investigators suspected that these visits were not accidental and that Justo, perhaps, wanted to get rid of the kidnapped girl's body there. Law enforcement officers went to the mentioned place and spoke with the owner of the building. The man said that he had indeed repeatedly seen a red car. It first appeared around 5 p.m. on June 21, and the driver behaved extremely suspiciously. He wandered back and forth, peered into the windows, and then got into the car and drove away. According to the owner of the house, a young dark-skinned man with curly hair was behind the wheel. Later, the car visited this place several more times. Police began to examine the surrounding area and found items of women's clothing, stockings and underwear, buried in the ground. Relatives of the missing girl recognized these items, confirming that they belonged to Linda. However, the girl's body was not found there. Meanwhile, the results of the DNA examination arrived. Justo's genetic material was found on the discovered stockings and underwear. On July 10, the suspect was called in for questioning. At first, he denied being in that area and seeing Linda, but there was strong evidence against him, recordings from surveillance cameras and a DNA match. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Justo changed his testimony. He stated that he sometimes drove on dirt roads and could have accidentally ended up in those places. The man admitted that he occasionally drank alcohol but insisted that there was never anyone else in the car with him. Justo could not explain how his DNA ended up on the missing girl's belongings, so he was arrested. The suspect was charged with kidnapping and murdering Linda, despite the fact that her body had not yet been found at that time. After analyzing the totality of the evidence, investigators concluded that the girl was most likely already dead. Having obtained a warrant, the police conducted searches in Justo's house and car. The car turned out to be thoroughly washed, and there was a sharp smell of chlorine in the cabin. An empty bottle of bleach was found in the trunk, and the floor was covered with new mats. Nothing was found in the suspect's house that could shed light on this case. Neither the 2 pairs of latex gloves nor the shoelaces that Justo had purchased that morning at Walmart were found there. The police also failed to find the clothes that the man was wearing on the day of Linda's disappearance. Instead, the police found out that after the girl's disappearance, Justo had visited a self-service car wash station. After studying the recordings from the local surveillance cameras, investigators saw that before entering the car wash, the suspect first drove up to the garbage cans and threw something away. Most likely, those were his clothes, because then the man changed into different attire. At that moment, there were no longer any passengers in the car. The car wash employees said that the driver was extremely thorough in cleaning his vehicle, especially the interior, which seemed suspicious to them. The search for Linda's body continued. Particular attention was paid to the area where her underwear was found. And only 10 months after the girl's disappearance, thanks to the testimony of Justo himself, the remains of a human body were discovered behind the railway tracks. It was wrapped in a tarpaulin and wound with adhesive tape. The deceased was dressed, and her hands and feet were tied with ropes. Another rope was tightening the victim's neck, the edges of the apron were wrapped around her face, and her mouth was sealed with tape. Investigators suggested that Justo had initially buried the girl's body along with her stockings, but later returned to the crime scene and moved the remains to another, more secure location behind the tracks. A forensic medical examination established that Linda died from strangulation and also had antemortem knife wounds in the neck area. Traces of blood were found in the victim's vagina, indicating that she was still alive at the time the knife wounds were inflicted. The identity of the deceased was officially recognized. It was the missing Linda Stoltzfus. However, the experts could not definitively establish whether had been committed against her. Nevertheless, the prosecution insisted of the crime, evidence of which was the presence of Justo's DNA on the victim's underwear. Taking this into account, as well as the threat of a possible death sentence, the lawyer advised his client to make a deal with the investigation and plead guilty. Justo agreed. Ultimately, the defendant pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, kidnapping, rape, and falsification of evidence. The prosecutor and the relatives of the deceased girl agreed to this deal, because it was thanks to Justo's testimony that Linda's body was found, which otherwise would probably never have been discovered. Thus, the victim's relatives were able to bury her properly. The defendant confirmed that he had reburied the remains himself. During the court hearing, the killer offered his apologies both to the family of the deceased and to his adoptive parents, who had supported him throughout the entire process. Members of Linda's family stated that they needed time to cope with the tragedy, but in the end, they planned to forgive the criminal, because this is what their holy scripture teaches them. The court found the accused guilty and sentenced him to imprisonment for a term of 35.5 to 71 years for intentional murder. In addition, for violating the conditions of early release, Justo must serve another 17.5 years in prison. Thus, the maximum term that threatens him is 88 years behind bars, which in his case is actually equivalent to life imprisonment. This material will focus on the tragic story that unfolded in Australia during 2016. It is a tale about a young woman whose life was cut short prematurely, and the mysterious circumstances that took place within a private residential apartment in one of the districts of the Australian metropolis of Sydney. The events of May 2016 in the western suburbs of Sydney, specifically in a locality called Parramatta, became a turning point for 22-year-old Daria Volnokin, a resident of a multi-story apartment complex. Daria, a Canadian citizen, arrived on the Australian continent in September 2015 with the aim of radically changing her life circumstances. The girl's character was marked by brightness and purposefulness. She had many ambitions and plans for the future. In her new place of residence, she managed to quickly integrate into the social environment, find a circle of friends, get a job in the customer service industry, and also try her hand at modeling. There seemed to be many prospects ahead, but one tragic night dramatically changed the course of events. On the evening of May 27, 2016, Daria spent time within the walls of her own apartment. Her place of residence was in a new building equipped with a modern video recording system that covered all the common areas of the building. Surveillance footage, which later became the subject of study by law enforcement agencies, captured the moment Daria entered the lobby accompanied by a male companion. Subsequent frames showed their joint ascent by elevator, with nothing indicating the presence of a conflict situation. However, the events that took place in the private space of the apartment later became the central object of an official investigation. While inside the residential premises, the visitor moved towards the kitchen area. In this place, he took a large knife in his hands. Daria, witnessing this, let out a cry of fright, but the man instantly demanded the cessation of any vocal manifestations. Then came the demand to remove articles of clothing, after which, over the course of several painful minutes, events took place that ended with the seizure of the victim's money and the attacker leaving the premises, abandoning Daria in a state of deep psychological shock. Representatives of law enforcement agencies who appeared at the scene after receiving a signal began conducting investigative actions. The object of their attention was the recordings from video surveillance systems, which documented the process of an unknown person entering and exiting the building. However, establishing the identity of this person remained an unresolved task. Realizing the potential danger that this individual could pose both to Daria herself and to a wide range of citizens, law enforcement officers launched an active search. Biographical information about Daria Volnokin indicates her Canadian origin and upbringing. Information obtained from her social networking profiles points to the fact of studying at an educational institution in the city of Calgary, where she acquired knowledge in the field of business and corporate communications. The girl demonstrated a high level of motivation and strived for professional growth, drawing inspiration from the examples of women who were able to overcome social barriers and achieve significant heights in their careers. The content she posted on social networks often contained reflections on the importance of personal freedom and the need to realize one's own aspirations, despite possible rejection from others. On a September day in 2015, having reached the age of 20, Daria made the decision to radically transform her life and moved from Canada to the opposite side of the planet, Australia, guided by the search for new horizons and unexplored opportunities. Such a step required remarkable courage, especially given the absence of family ties in Australian territory. Her circle of acquaintances later noted that Daria radiated energy and enthusiasm, demonstrating a readiness to explore the new continent. In the reality of Sydney, she showed rapid adaptation, successfully finding application for her abilities in the hospitality industry. Her work activities included performing the duties of a waitress and hostess in restaurant and bar-type establishments, and later cooperation began with a modeling agency, which involved participation in professional photo shoots as a lingerie model. The materials that appeared on her social networks demonstrated the image of an energetic, self-confident personality who enjoyed the process of life. At the same time, there were aspects of her existence that remained hidden even from the most trusted individuals. In the period preceding the attack, she began an activity related to escort services, which was aimed at ensuring additional financial income. Such a decision was probably due to the desire for economic independence and the desire for accelerated adaptation to living conditions in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Activities in the field of escort services constituted that part of her life that she preferred not to discuss even with her closest comrades. Investigative bodies established that her registration with a specialized agency had an active status, and client reception was carried out directly in her residential premises. It was through the channels of this agency that Daria met the person who later carried out the attack. This man belonged to the circle of her clients and arranged a meeting for May 27, 2016. This circumstance explains why the video surveillance materials record their joint entry into the building without any signs of anxiety on Daria's part. For her, this meeting was initially perceived as an ordinary work episode, but eventually turned into a terrible experience that radically changed her life path. In a conversation with arriving law enforcement officers, Daria provided a detailed description of the attack and the fact of sexual violence. According to her testimony, the client initially did not arouse suspicion, but the situation changed dramatically after the apartment door was closed. Once in the room, the man headed to the kitchen area, where he opened one of the drawers and removed a large kitchen knife, which the victim compared in her testimony to a butcher's tool. Seeing the cold weapon, Daria could not restrain a cry of horror, but the attacker immediately stopped her vocal manifestations, sharply ordering her to remain silent. The tone of his voice was aggressive and threatening, which, according to the victim, created a feeling of mortal danger. In her testimony, she noted, "He shouted a command not to make sounds and demanded that I get rid of my clothes. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and I began to take them off, because I believed that disobedience could cost me my life. I was in a state of panic fear. Holding the knife in one hand, the man used the other to take out a mobile device and began video recording the events. He directed the camera at Daria, demanding that she utter degrading things. In particular, he forced her to repeat offensive definitions about herself, including the phrase, "Say that you are a whore." Being under the threat of a cold weapon, Daria was forced to comply with the demands. She told law enforcement that the attacker asked her incomprehensible questions that intensified her feeling of complete helplessness. One of these questions, recorded in the official testimony, was particularly cruel in nature. He was interested in whether she was enjoying what was happening, obviously relishing her suffering. According to Daria's observations, the behavior of the attacker indicated confidence and prior preparation. His actions had the character of a rehearsed scenario. He showed no signs of nervousness or haste, and his threat sounded with the confidence of a person who has no doubt about his own impunity. The duration of the attack was several minutes. Daria estimated this interval as 3 to 4 minutes, although in such circumstances, every second can be perceived as an eternity. Throughout this time, she remained in a state of extreme fright, trying to avoid actions that could provoke the aggressor to more violent acts, thus preserving her own life. After achieving his goals, the attacker was in no hurry to leave the premises. He searched the apartment, took possession of the money that Daria had earned during the day, and only after that did he leave the residential premises. Law enforcement agencies immediately began collecting evidence. Video recordings from surveillance systems were seized, confirming the veracity of the victim's story. The video materials recorded the process of the man entering the building accompanied by Daria, their movement by elevator, and his subsequent exit from the complex. These recordings became the main lead for the investigation, although the identification of the criminal's identity remained an unsolved problem at that time. Investigators also conducted an inspection of the apartment, recording the absence of traces of physical struggle, which confirmed the fact of the victim's submission under the threat of the use of cold weapons in order to avoid more severe consequences. The consequences of that fateful night forever affected the life of the victim. Despite the fact that she managed to survive the attack and provide detailed testimony to law enforcement, the psychological state of the woman caused serious concern. Law enforcement officials offered comprehensive support, including professional psychological assistance, but Daria, as persons from her inner circle later noted, showed attempts to maintain outward resilience. However, the further development of events would not have a positive conclusion. More details about this will be told in the following parts. In the period after the tragic events that took place in Daria's residential premises, law enforcement agencies faced an extremely difficult challenge. The object of their investigation was a person who demonstrated amazing self-confidence in his actions, while leaving a minimal amount of physical evidence. However, even these limited clues became the initial basis for an investigation that later revealed the existence of a large-scale series of criminal acts. The analytical work of law enforcement officers began with a detailed study of video recording materials. The footage showing a man with a distinctive tattoo on his neck area, who accompanied Daria when entering the building and later independently left the premises, became the main lead in the case. Despite the fact that the criminal's face was only partially visible, his body art stood out as a unique identifying feature. In the photographic material that was made public by the police services, the suspect's face was concealed, since the publication took place before the trial, and the principle of the presumption of innocence remained in force. However, according to official statements, the tattoo in the neck area was clearly discernible. Daria's testimony, despite her difficult emotional state, was marked by exceptional detail. She provided a description not only of the physical characteristics of the attacker, but also of the peculiarities of his speech. These details allowed investigators to form an initial photo fit of the suspect, although his identity remained unestablished. At the same time, investigative bodies began checking similar incidents both within the Parramatta district and beyond its territorial borders. The results of this work turned out to be unexpected. It was established that the attack on Daria was not an isolated case. In the chronological framework from the beginning of May to the end of June 2016, a whole series of similar criminal episodes were recorded on the territory of Sydney, many of which showed alarming parallels with Daria's case. The vast majority of victims were employed in the escort services industry. Law enforcement officers began to establish links between individual cases, forming a hypothesis about the existence of a serial criminal who acted according to an established algorithm. One of the early similar incidents dates back to May 7, 2016, 3 weeks before the attack on Daria. On the indicated day, a person whose external characteristics corresponded to the descriptions provided by Daria organized a meeting with an escort worker in the central part of the city. Once in a private room, he demonstrated a cold weapon and, using threats, carried out an attack, accompanying his actions with the humiliation of the victim and demands for unquestioning submission. On the same day, a meeting took place with another woman, during which a similar scenario of actions was implemented. The victim characterized the attacker as an aggressively minded person with dominant tendencies, noting his use of degrading vocabulary and his statements about receiving pleasure from observing human fear in conditions of helplessness. These verbal manifestations, along with the presence of a tattoo on the neck, became important connecting elements between this crime and the attack on Daria. On May 20, 7 days before the incident with Daria, the same person carried out another attack within Parramatta. In this case, the criminal limited himself to an act of robbery, using a knife as a means of intimidation, but did not linger in the premises for a long time. 3 days after the event with Daria, he carried out a repeated attack in another part of Sydney, where, using threats with a cold weapon, he robbed and assaulted another representative of the escort industry. Each subsequent victim reported identical circumstances. A man with a characteristic accent used a knife as a tool of intimidation, carried out video recording of events using a mobile device, and demonstrated an alarming self-confidence, as if enjoying control over his victims. However, the most shocking episode in this series of crimes was the incident on June 24, 2016. On the indicated day, the criminal lured a 13-year-old student into his vehicle under the pretext of needing assistance with automotive electrical components. As soon as the minor was in the car's interior, he began transporting her, initiating a 4-hour period of terrible trials. During this time, he moved her between 10 different locations within Sydney, using threats with a cold weapon and forcing her to fulfill deviant demands. All events were recorded on a mobile device, while the girl was required to verbally confirm her supposedly voluntary participation in order to create the illusion of consent. At one point, she was forced to visit a commercial establishment to purchase duct tape and razor blades, while the criminal hoped that her attempts to draw attention to her situation would go unnoticed. After comparing all the recorded cases, law enforcement agencies concluded that they were dealing with a particularly dangerous subject whose activity was characterized by increasing audacity. A specialized investigative group was formed, which focused on identifying and detaining the suspect. A systematic analysis of video surveillance recordings from all locations where the attacks took place began. The tattoo in the neck area, which was mentioned by several victims, turned into a key identification marker that made it possible to establish links between all the incidents. Law enforcement officers also checked databases of persons with criminal backgrounds, but at that time no matches were found that would indicate a specific identity. A turning point came on June 25, 2016, the day after the attack on the minor. The police received information about a suspicious man who matched the compiled description in the Bondi area, a popular coastal zone. When a patrol group tried to stop his silver Ford car, the driver refused to comply with the demands and sharply increased speed. The pursuit was tense, with the suspect driving the vehicle in an aggressive manner, completely ignoring the signals of law enforcement officers. At one point, he lost control and collided with a parked car, stopping near a public transport stop. When the police surrounded the car, he tried to actively resist, starting a physical confrontation with several armed officers. However, the odds were clearly not in his favor, and he was quickly subdued. During the arrest, law enforcement officers established the identity of the suspect. It turned out to be 28-year-old Mustafa Kai Ritchie. His physical characteristics, including the tattoo on his neck, completely correlated with the descriptions provided by the victims. During a search of his vehicle and personal belongings, physical evidence was found linking him to previous attacks, in particular a mobile phone on which, as was later established, video recordings of his crimes were stored. The discovered video materials became a key element of the evidence base, although their content turned out to be so shocking that law enforcement agencies established a restricted access regime to them even for employees of investigative units who were not directly involved in conducting the case. The results of the investigation demonstrated that Kai Ritchie carried out his criminal activities in accordance with a carefully worked-out algorithm. The process of selecting victims was carried out among persons employed in the field of escort services, organizing meetings took place through specialized agencies, and cold weapons were used as the main means of psychological pressure. The nature of the attacks combined elements of both physical violence and psychological humiliation. Video recording of criminal acts had a dual purpose: to humiliate the victims and create an illusory picture of their voluntary participation in the events. The incident with the underage schoolgirl represented the apogee of his criminal activity, demonstrating a readiness to escalate the severity of criminal acts. Each attack committed left psychological trauma in the victims, but the detention of the criminal put an end to his destructive activities. Kai Ritchie's behavior after the arrest was characterized by a demonstrative disdain for law enforcement procedures. During investigative actions, he provided partial admissions regarding his participation in the attacks, while trying to minimize the degree of severity of the acts committed. According to information from law enforcement agencies, the suspect insisted on the voluntary nature of some of his contacts with the victims. He referred to the video recordings created using his mobile device as alleged confirmation of the victim's consent, despite the fact that the recordings themselves unambiguously testified to the actions of women under duress. During one of the interrogations, a phrase emanated from him: "They did not realize the nature of the activity they were agreeing to when choosing this profession." Such a statement caused sharp condemnation from investigators, since it completely disregarded the psychological suffering and coercion experienced by his victims. Kai Ritchie also appealed to the presence of a chemical dependence, trying to explain his behavior by the negative influence of psychoactive substances. He claimed to be in a state characterized by loss of self-control during the attacks. However, representatives of law enforcement agencies and the prosecutor's office expressed a skeptical attitude toward such statements, pointing to the excessive methodicalness and regularity of his actions to characterize impulsive behavior. In particular, preliminary planning of meetings through an escort agency, purposeful selection of victims, and systematic use of a knife as a tool of intimidation testified to the conscious nature of his actions. The prosecutor's office formulated an extensive set of criminal charges against Kai Ritchie related to his illegal activities. The total number of episodes incriminated to him exceeded 40 points, which included attacks using weapons, crimes against property, forcing degrading actions, and in the context of the incident with the minor, kidnapping and acts qualified as especially serious crimes against a child. Each charge was based on a body of evidence: testimonies of victims, video materials from the suspect's mobile device, and recordings from video surveillance systems. In the context of motivational aspects, representatives of law enforcement agencies and expert psychologists involved in working on the case formulated a conclusion about the connection between Kai Ritchie's actions and a pathological desire for dominance and control. His behavioral patterns, in particular systematic video recording, indicated an attempt not only to humiliate the victims, but also to create a kind of collection of trophies of his crimes. The use of a mobile device for filming, according to investigators, was an integral part of his psychological satisfaction, providing the opportunity to relive moments of dominance. Chemical addiction could act as a factor in increasing aggressive manifestations, but it could not explain the entire complexity of his criminal behavior. The detention of Kai Ritchie brought a sense of relief to the victims, but the prospect of a lengthy trial remained a reality. Representatives of the prosecutor's office began preparations for the presentation of the case, which was supposed to ensure the inevitability of punishment for the crimes committed. Court hearings began during 2017. The prosecution strategy was based on irrefutable evidence, testimonies of victims, video surveillance materials, and video recordings seized from Kai Ritchie's phone. The prosecutor, in his speech, noted, his behavior went beyond ordinary criminality, demonstrating a deeply sadistic character. He took pleasure in the suffering and helplessness of his victims, creating documentary evidence of this for personal use. The prosecution insisted on the application of the most severe punishment, focusing attention on the fact that Guy Ritchie poses a significant danger to public safety. The defense side, on the contrary, focused on attempts to mitigate the responsibility of their client, appealing to the fact of his addiction. Lawyers also tried to question individual charges, claiming the voluntary nature of some of the meetings with the victims, basing their position on the allegedly contractual nature of relations with representatives of the escort industry. However, such arguments were promptly refuted. The video materials unambiguously demonstrated the actions of the victims under the pressure of armed coercion. The trial lasted for several months, and at the beginning of 2018, the jury announced its verdict. Mustafa Guy Ritchie was found guilty on the vast majority of the charges against him. In March 2018, the judge of the District Court of New South Wales announced the sentence, 40 years in prison with the right to petition for parole after serving 30 years. The judge emphasized that the severity of the punishment reflects the exceptional gravity of the crimes committed and the need to isolate from society a person whose actions were qualified as exceptionally cruel. The surname Guy Ritchie soon again became the subject of media coverage. First of all, it is worth telling about the fate of Daria. The tragic story of Daria Volnokin took an even more dramatic turn. Just a few weeks before the announcement of the court decision regarding Guy Ritchie, the media reported her death, although the details of the event were not disclosed. Some mass media indicated that Daria's death was the result of her personal decision. According to available information, she was going through a difficult period characterized by severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the attack she experienced. Despite the provision of professional psychological support, she was unable to overcome the psychological consequences of the traumatic experience. A person from her inner circle reported that Daria felt morally destroyed and could not find inner peace after that tragic night. Her friends recalled the loss of her former life energy and a tendency towards social isolation, immersion in her own thoughts. Her death caused a deep emotional trauma to her loved ones in Canada, who forever lost hope for her return to her homeland. This tragedy initiated a discussion in Australian society about the need to improve the system of support for victims of similar crimes in order to prevent such consequences in the future. Mustafa Guy Ritchie himself also did not complete serving his full sentence. In 2021, he was hospitalized in a medical institution of the penitentiary system, where he was diagnosed with an oncological disease, specifically a brain neoplasm. His death occurred in the prison hospital the same year. His demise symbolically concluded this tragic story, but it did not bring much moral satisfaction to those who suffered as a result of his actions. The story of Daria and other victims of Guy Ritchie became a catalyst for public debates in Australia, especially in the context of ensuring the safety of women involved in the escort industry and the need to develop more effective mechanisms for protecting socially vulnerable categories of the population. This narrative serves as a reminder of how one event can radically destroy the life trajectories of numerous people. Daria Volnokin came to Australia, guided by dreams of a promising future, but faced a horrific reality that transformed her existence and led to a tragic finale. Adriana Young case has officially come to a close. Experts have reached consensus, the family is left devastated, and the investigation is closed. But are endings always what they seem at first glance? The last expert, upon finishing his examination, uttered words that made everyone question the appropriateness of closing the case. Shocking new evidence has turned everything we thought about this case upside down. Today we will reveal why respected international specialists are casting doubt on the official conclusions and what it means for the family in their search for the truth. The world's most experienced detectives are ready to put an end to it, but leading medical experts refuse to accept it. The family travels 5,000 miles, transporting their daughter's body in search of answers, only to discover that the truth may be even more horrifying than they imagined. June 2025. The Guyana police make an announcement, the investigation is officially terminated. Leonard McCaution, a veteran investigator with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, makes a final conclusion about the absence of any evidence of wrongdoing. His intelligence reveals something else that surprised many. Do you remember all those theories about the hotel owner Bajnaran Bola? Video surveillance showed that he wasn't even at the hotel when Adriana disappeared. The person who was the prime suspect was physically absent from the scene. The police statement contained an assertion that pointed to the key problem from the very beginning: if a thorough search had been conducted properly from the outset, this case would have never gained such international attention. Think about it for a moment: global protests, demonstrations on 3 continents, calls for justice from around the world, all because someone didn't search the pool diligently enough. But while the authorities were celebrating the case's conclusion, a storm of controversy was brewing in the medical community. Dr. Carol Terry, the chief medical examiner of Gwinnett County, Georgia, faced the most complex challenge of her career. Despite the thorough professional work in Guyana, the findings of the American experts will spark a debate that will split the entire specialist community. Something was bothering Dr. Terry. The circumstances didn't align with her years of experience. The timeline made no sense. The condition of the body raised questions that troubled her professional instincts. And then came the turning point. When asked point-blank if Adriana had drowned, Dr. Terry made a decision that stunned everyone present: she refused to confirm it. 3 leading pathologists, in Barbados and at Mount Sinai Hospital in Delaware, concluded it was drowning. And here the leading American pathologist refuses to agree with their findings. But Dr. Terry didn't stop there. In a candid interview with journalist Travis Chase, she characterized the case as highly suspicious and stressed that only a thorough investigation could determine whether Adriana drowned or died under suspicious circumstances. At this stage, it's impossible to unequivocally state that the cause of death was drowning, she declared. Drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion, the expert explained. First, it's necessary to rule out all other possibilities. Even a timely examination didn't prove the fact of drowning. Her assessment was unambiguous: the investigation should focus not on the autopsy results, but on those 20 hours that fell out of sight. What happened during this time? Where was the body and why couldn't trained searchers find it? But Dr. Terry's doubts were just the tip of the iceberg. Across the Atlantic, another specialist was reaching conclusions that called into question all the official statements. Dr. Mark Devanish, a consultant at the University of Nottingham Hospital in Britain with dual specialization, was analyzing the same materials from a new angle. His discoveries directly contradicted the official version. His analysis showed that the girl did not drown in that pool. The science was clear: when a person drowns in a large volume of water, the body absorbs a significant amount of fluid, the density increases, and the body sinks. But Adriana was found on the surface of the water with no signs of prolonged immersion. This goes against our understanding of typical drowning cases. His alternative theory was disturbing. Evidence indicated that the girl may have been given some substances and drowned in a smaller volume of water, and then the body was moved to the pool area. The pool was not the scene of the incident, but the place where the body was discovered. These scientific findings undermined the very foundation of the official theory. 2 independent experts, separated by thousands of kilometers, were casting doubt on the same official conclusion. The family's observations reinforced these medical concerns. Adriana's body showed no signs of swelling, which is characteristic of drowning victims. Family members reported visible bruises and scratches on the girl's knees, elbows, face, hands and toes. These details only deepened the suspicions about the circumstances of her death. McCaution's investigation found no traces of a crime, just an accidental drowning, plain and simple. But after 20 hours of fruitless searching, the body suddenly surfaced in the same water that experts had already combed through. After weeks in the USA, Adriana's family faced a devastating reality. The 4th examination couldn't provide the definitive answers they so desperately awaited, but it revealed something no less important: serious professional doubts about the official conclusions. On the Reset talk show, Andy and Mike Lewis announced, "We will return to Guyana by the end of the month for the funeral. Adriana will rest where she was born." However, the family's legal team made it clear that their search for answers is not over. Additional versions will be explored regardless of the official findings. Even in death, Adriana couldn't find peace. The official verdict remains unchanged: accidental drowning, no evidence of a crime, the case is permanently closed. That is the position of the authorities. But professional doubts persist. Dr. Terry's refusal to confirm drowning and her characterization of the case as extremely suspicious. Dr. Devanish's scientific analysis, which suggests the use of substances and an alternative drowning location. The family's observations about the body's atypical condition. The impossible chronology of the body's appearance. How can a case be officially closed when leading experts from the USA, Britain and Canada can't agree on what actually happened? Beyond all the investigations and examinations, there remains a family that lost a daughter. Adriana was only 11, and she should have safely returned home that day. Instead, she found herself at the center of an international controversy that may never be resolved. The case is officially closed, but for the grieving family, it is the uncertainty itself that becomes the heaviest burden. They will bury their girl by the end of June, but the questions that tormented them from the very beginning won't go away. For experts from 3 countries, 2 continents, 1 child, and no agreement. Where is the truth in this confrontation? Some cases end with the triumph of justice. Others, with questions that echo for eternity. As Adriana finally returns home to her final resting place, the search for the whole truth continues. And sometimes this uncertainty becomes the heaviest burden one can possibly bear. But the questions refuse to disappear. Those 20 lost hours remain the biggest mystery of this case. Not for the investigators who closed the case. Not for the experts who signed their final conclusions. Not even for the search teams who somehow failed to find her body during numerous systematic searches. How could professionals fail to find what was later discovered in the same locations? The answer challenges the entire official chronology of events. If Adriana's body had been in that pool from the beginning, experienced searchers would have found it instantly. The fact that several searches in a row yielded no results indicates that something fundamental in the official version doesn't align with reality. But the medical contradictions run deeper than just discrepancies in the timeline. Dr. Terry wasn't the only one who had professional doubts. Across the ocean, Dr. Devanish's scientific analysis directly contradicted the drowning conclusion. 2 experts, studying the same evidence, reached disturbing alternative conclusions. The medical facts that troubled both professionals were undeniable. Adriana's body showed none of the expected signs of drowning. No swelling, despite the circumstances. No traces of prolonged immersion in water. No evidence to support the official cause of death. Instead, they documented something entirely different. The family noticed bruises on her tiny body. Scratches on her knees, elbows, face. How do you explain evidence that contradicts all your conclusions? Dr. Devanish's theory was particularly unsettling. His analysis suggested that Adriana may have been given some substances, drowned in a smaller volume of water, and then the body was transferred to the pool. The pool was not where she died, but where her body was placed. This scientific assessment completely undermines the foundation of the official investigation. The family's journey across continents in search of answers reveals the devastating human cost of these unresolved contradictions. They transported their daughter's body for thousands of kilometers, hoping for definitive answers from leading American pathologists. Instead, they received confirmation that their worst fears may be justified. When Dr. Terry called the case extremely suspicious and refused to confirm drowning as the cause of death, she validated every suspicion the family had from day one. Imagine what this means for a family in mourning. They followed all the official procedures. They trusted the system. They expected justice through proper channels. And they found that leading medical experts can't agree on how their child died. 4 pathologists from 3 countries examined the same evidence. 3 concluded it was drowning. 1 refused to agree, calling it suspicious. Dr. Devanish went even further, suggesting substances and alternative scenarios. How can a case be officially closed when international medical experts fundamentally disagree on what happened? The family's legal team made it clear that additional versions will be considered regardless of the official conclusions. Sometimes, when medical professionals from different continents are sounding the alarm, a mother's fight for the truth doesn't end with bureaucratic statements. McCaution found no evidence of a crime and closed the case. But his investigation couldn't explain the impossible chronology of events or resolve the medical contradictions that still divide specialists. The truth lies somewhere in those missing 20 hours that no official investigation has been able to properly explain. Cases like Adriana's expose the gulf between official conclusions and medical reality. When leading pathologists refuse to accept drowning as the cause of death, when experts suggest alternative scenarios involving substances, when physical evidence contradicts official versions, silence becomes complicity. It was an ordinary Friday evening in a small London park. A young woman, as she had done many times before, left her home to meet a friend. Her route passed through the park and usually took no more than 5 minutes. However, this time, things were about to unfold differently. This woman was not a celebrity or a public figure. Her name was Sabina Nessa, and she worked as a teacher at a primary school. Sabina was a simple woman who loved her family and her job. That evening, she just wanted to take a walk in the park and spend time with her friend. But in less than a minute, Sabina's life was cut short by a stranger who brutally and senselessly took her life. This tragedy is not just another case of violence. It's a story about how even in her own neighborhood, a woman cannot feel safe walking through a park on a weekend day. Sabina Nessa was born on September 23, 1993, in England to a family of Albanian immigrants who practiced Islam. However, Sabina herself grew up somewhat detached from her parents' religion and culture. She spent her childhood in Bedfordshire, where she became well acquainted with the British way of life and traditions. Not much is known about Sabina's early years. It is only known that in 2014, she successfully completed her studies at the sociology department, and in 2020, she received a certificate that allowed her to teach in schools. That same year, the young woman took a bold step. She moved to London, where she independently secured a job as a primary school teacher in the southeast part of the city. The school administration highly valued Sabina as an educator, noting her intelligence, kindness, and dedication to her students. The girl's relatives spoke of her as a sensitive, caring, and beautiful person. At 28, Sabina had ambitious plans for the future. She dreamed of working as a teacher in one of the Persian Gulf countries and even shared with her friends her intention to go to Dubai to make this dream a reality. But a cruel fate had other plans. All the girl's plans and dreams were shattered on a night that was no different from many others. On September 17, 2021, at 8:30 in the evening, Sabina left her home on Estelle Road, near Kidbrooke Station. She was heading to a bar on Pegler Square in Kidbrooke Village to meet a friend. Usually, the journey took a little over 5 minutes, but that evening, Sabina was running a bit late, so she decided to take a shortcut through Cador Park. Although the girl had previously expressed concerns about walking through this park after dark, this time, haste trumped caution. The young teacher walked alone along a dark path, surrounded by trees, ponds, and marshy areas. She was not destined to reach her destination. When Sabina did not show up at the bar, her friend did not make much of it, thinking that she had simply changed her mind about coming. However, throughout the evening, she tried to contact Sabina by phone, but she did not answer. For Sabina, who always quickly responded to calls and messages, such behavior was uncharacteristic. But the friend still did not contact the police. The girl's family also became concerned about the lack of news from her. However, both her parents and sister decided that Sabina had probably just gotten held up somewhere with friends and would definitely let them know soon. Unfortunately, this did not happen. The next day, September 18th, around 5:30 in the evening, a grim discovery was made. An elderly man walking his dogs near the community center in Cador Park noticed something strange under a large pile of fallen leaves. Raking through the leaves, he saw a woman's body. The woman had been brutally beaten and was half naked. She was not wearing pants or underwear. The man immediately called the police, who quickly arrived at the scene. An examination of the body showed that the victim had been beaten to death with a blunt object and then strangled. Given the absence of clothing below the waist, investigators suspected that the murder may have been sexually motivated. But it was still too early to draw final conclusions. News of the horrific find quickly spread among local residents, who were shocked and frightened by the brutality of the crime. That same evening, the police reported the arrest of a 38-year-old man on suspicion of involvement in the murder. However, he was later released, although he remained a suspect. Investigators also appealed to the public to provide any information or footage from surveillance cameras that could assist in the investigation. On Monday, September 20th, an autopsy was performed on the body of the deceased at the Greenwich mortuary. Although forensic experts found no evidence of rape, the circumstances under which the body was found still suggested that the murder may have had a sexual undertone. That same day, the identity of the deceased was established. It was Sabina Nessa. The head of the school where the girl worked, Lisa Williams, expressed deep condolences to Sabina's family, noting her professional and personal qualities, and stated that the students would greatly miss their beloved teacher. On September 27, the Metropolitan Police announced the arrest of a second suspect in the case, a 38-year-old man. His identity was not disclosed. Instead, investigators released video footage from surveillance cameras that captured the potential perpetrator on the day of the murder. The footage shows a man standing in Pegler Square with a metal road sign in his hands, looking around. At some point, he pulls a hood over his head and heads towards the park where Sabina's body was later found. Cameras captured that around 8:30 p.m., when Sabina passed by him, the man turned to look at her and then rushed after her. Sabina did not notice that he had started following her from behind. Suddenly, the attacker caught up with the woman and began hitting her on the head with a heavy road sign, which he had apparently brought with him. A few powerful blows, and part of the sign flew off, falling to the ground. In total, experts counted 34 blows, which likely led to a loss of consciousness. After that, the man grabbed Sabina and dragged her into the thicket. Some time later, cameras recorded the attacker returning to the scene of the assault. He collected the fragments of the murder weapon and wiped the bench where he had apparently finished off the victim with napkins. The police urged everyone who recognized the man or had information about him to urgently contact the investigation. A photo of a silver car that the suspect had allegedly used was also released. After several days of carefully studying the video footage, investigators identified the likely killer, but he had left no traces at the crime scene. However, shortly after, the police managed to find footage from another camera showing the man throwing the murder weapon out of a car leaving the park. The license plate of the vehicle helped establish the identity of the owner. It turned out to be 36-year-old Kosi Selimaj, an Albanian living illegally in Britain. As it turned out, this was a person with a propensity for violence. Selimaj was born in 1985 in Albania. At the age of 12, he dropped out of school and moved with his family to Greece. His parents did not stay there, but Kosi, along with his brother and sisters, remained, hoping to find work. However, a few years later, he had to illegally, hiding in a truck, move to the United Kingdom. In Eastbourne, Selimaj got a job as a handyman and security guard. In November 2018, he married an EU citizen whose name has not been disclosed. This marriage allowed him to legalize his status in the country. However, as the investigation showed, the newlyweds hardly lived together. Selimaj often traveled to his homeland. During 2.5 years of marriage, he visited Albania 6 times. It seems that the marriage was fictitious. British law enforcement officials found out that in his homeland, the man had no criminal record. But his wife admitted that Kosi had repeatedly strangled her in fits of aggression. In the summer of 2021, she could not stand it anymore and left him. For Selimaj, this meant serious problems with his legal status in the UK. Meanwhile, the woman got a job at a 5-star hotel, where her ex-husband was staying on September 17. Thanks to the testimony of the ex-wife and video surveillance footage, investigators were able to reconstruct the events of that evening. It was established that Selimaj had flown to London the day before and, despite having housing in Eastbourne, checked into a hotel in his hometown. According to the police, this indicated his plans to find a victim for. A few hours before the murder, he caused a scandal at the hotel over the billing, so the staff called the police. However, the officers who arrived on the call did not detain the guest. Later, Selimaj met his ex-wife in the hotel parking lot and offered her intimacy, but she refused. According to the woman, at that moment, he seemed very agitated and nervous. After the incident with his ex-wife, Selimaj got into his car and drove to London, parking on Pegler Square in Kidbrooke, dozens of kilometers from his own home. Investigators suggest that, having been rejected by his ex-wife, he decided to find another victim. According to the testimony of Selimaj's ex-wife, during their meeting in the hotel parking lot, the man was in a very agitated, confused, and nervous state. After she rejected his offer of intimacy, he got into his car and drove away. At first, his route lay in the direction of Brighton, but later he turned around and headed to southwest London. The final point of his route was Pegler Square in Kidbrooke, where he parked his silver Nissan. This area was quite remote from Selimaj's place of residence. Investigators assumed that, being enraged by the rejection of his ex-wife's harassment, the man went in search of another victim to satisfy his perverse desires. The eyes of street cameras recorded the potential attacker entering a supermarket and buying a rolling pin. He probably considered it as a weapon for the attack. However, something made him change his mind and throw this object away. Eventually, around 8 p.m., Selimaj arrived at Cador Park. For the next 30 minutes, he waited there, looking out for a lonely victim. At that time, Sabina Nessa was finishing her work week. As on many other Friday evenings, she was going to meet a friend. Usually, the girl followed advice on choosing the safest route to the bar. But this time, she was in a hurry and decided to take a shortcut through Cador Park near Pegler Square. It was there that Selimaj noticed her. Making sure that the girl was walking alone, he rushed towards her. The attacker struck his victim a total of 34 blows to the head with a massive road sign, which he had apparently brought with him in the trunk of his car. The force of the blows was such that the metal structure could not withstand it and shattered into pieces. At that point, Sabina had already lost consciousness. However, Selimaj did not stop there. He grabbed the unconscious girl and strangled her. After that, he undressed her and covered the body with fallen leaves, trying to hide the traces of the crime. Having finished with his victim, the killer got into his car and drove to Eastbourne. On the way, near Tunbridge Wells, he stopped on a bridge and threw the murder weapon into the River Tees, hoping to get rid of the evidence forever. After midnight, Selimaj returned to the hotel where he had previously booked a room and went to rest as if nothing had happened. In the morning, he left the hotel just as calmly and went to work at the garage as if nothing had happened. Detectives Neil Jensen, who led the investigation into this brutal murder, drew attention to the stark contrast between the brutal way in which Selimaj dealt with Sabina and his unsuccessful attempt to achieve intimacy with his ex-wife shortly before the crime. For investigators, this was a clear sign that the murder was motive. They understood that they had to catch the dangerous pervert as soon as possible. Just a few days later, on Sunday, September 26, around 3 a.m., special forces burst into Selimaj's apartment in Eastbourne. The man was calmly lying in bed and did not even try to resist during the arrest. During the search, law enforcement officers found his sneakers with blood stains. Examination confirmed that the DNA from these stains completely matched the genetic material of Sabina Nessa. At the police station, investigators began interrogating the suspect. Selimaj remained silent until he was told that he was being accused of murder. Then, through an interpreter, he asked what would happen if he confessed and told them everything. However, since formal charges had already been brought, detectives could no longer ask him questions. On September 30th, Selimaj was brought to the Old Bailey Court in central London. The hearing took place via video link, as the accused was in custody. It was announced in court that, despite numerous blows to the victim's head with a blunt object, forensic experts had not yet established the exact cause of Sabina Nessa's death. On December 16, 2021, during the next hearing, Selimaj refused to plead guilty to intentional murder. At the same time, he agreed that it was his actions that led to the girl's death. The shocking murder of the young teacher did not immediately attract significant media attention. To rectify this situation, concerned journalists began to spread posts on social networks, condemning the lack of coverage of this tragedy by the leading media. Eventually, it worked. The Sabina Nessa case gained publicity and became a reason for public pressure on the authorities with demands to strengthen security measures for women on the streets of London. The head of the school where the deceased worked, Lisa Williams, said that the entire teaching staff was stunned by the horrific murder of their colleague, who had such a promising future ahead of her. She also shared how painfully Sabina's students are experiencing the tragedy. 30 of her pupils simply cannot understand why someone so cruelly took the life of their beloved teacher and why the world can be so cruel. Meanwhile, the investigation was moving towards its logical conclusion. On February 25, the trial of Selimaj began at the Old Bailey. To the surprise of those present, the accused pleaded guilty to the murder of Sabina Nessa. His lawyer noted that the defendant had not provided any explanation for his motives and did not even seem to feel remorse for what he had done. During the first hearing, the forensic expert presented evidence that the victim had suffered at least blunt force trauma to the head and strangulation. Although it was not possible to establish the exact cause of death, each of these injuries could have led to a fatal outcome. The investigation found no evidence of rape. However, according to the prosecution, a number of indirect evidence that Selimaj did not challenge points to the crime. Prosecutor Alison Morgan emphasized that the accused was ready to attack any woman who crossed his path. This was not a spontaneous impulse. The murder was planned in advance and committed with particular cynicism and cruelty. In his closing remarks, the judge characterized this vile attack as a premeditated murder for personal motives. He emphasized that Sabina Nessa had become a random victim of a monster who wanted to satisfy his perverse desires. On April 7, 2022, the sentencing of Selimaj was supposed to take place. However, the convict refused to be present at the hearing, which caused public outrage. The judge called him a coward for such behavior and noted that he did not have the authority to forcibly bring him to the courtroom. During his speech, the judge emphasized that the brutal murder of Sabina only intensified the feeling of insecurity that women experience on the streets, especially at night. He stressed that the victim had every right to walk in the park and enjoy life after a working week without fearing for her own safety. In the end, despite the absence of the accused, the court passed a sentence. Kosi Selimaj was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole no earlier than after 36 years. The family of the deceased girl met this news with relief. However, they could not resist calling the killer a vile cowardly beast. Shortly after the announcement of the verdict, Selimaj was transferred from prison to a high-security psychiatric hospital in Broadmoor for an assessment of his sanity. The uncle of the convict, Borda Selimaj, said that he had high hopes for his nephew when he immigrated from Albania. And now the whole family has to bear the burden of shame, financial difficulties, and emotional pain because of his terrible crime. Instead of starting a new life in Britain, he became a brutal killer. Sabina's sister does not hide her outrage at Selimaj's silence. She says that this insult will haunt her until the end of her days, and she will never understand what pushed him to commit such a terrible crime against her sister. Sabina Nessa was an ordinary 28-year-old girl. A teacher who loved her job, family, music, and art. She simply left the house to walk through a familiar park and meet a friend, a usual 5-minute route that she had taken dozens of times. And it was these 5 minutes that became fatal. Some stranger, for no reason at all, just took and brutally cut her life short because he could afford to do it. Sabina is not just another name in the criminal chronicles, not just a faceless victim. This is a life cut short suddenly and senselessly. It is the pain of a family that will not find solace until the end of their days, the fear of women who hear warnings every day like, "Don't walk alone, don't wear short skirts, don't walk in parks at night," as if this is the reason for the violence. The Sabina Nessa case has become a symbol of how fragile the line is between ordinary life and tragedy, how easily a woman can become a victim by a fatal coincidence. We are telling this story not for the sake of hype or views. We are doing it for the memory of Sabina, to demand justice, change, and safety. So that everyone who reads or watches this realizes, it did not happen somewhere else, it happened very close by, it could have happened to anyone. Sabina was supposed to live, rejoice, teach children, meet with her loved one, hug her parents, build a career. But one pervert took all this away from her for the sake of a few minutes of illusory pleasure. And this injustice cannot be changed or corrected. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.